Chairman, we're now live.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to those attending and to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Resident Services Committee, and my name is Councillor Wayne Bridges. I'm Chairman of this meeting. The key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you'll be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. And for those in the public gallery, you will not be on camera. Reminder to councillors, officers and those speaking today that you should turn your microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure that you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. A few housekeeping rules before we go on to the main agenda. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening. However, if one sounds, please follow the officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting point, which is the Civic Centre forecourt. Mobile devices to be placed on silent or switched off, and we have resident feedback forms at the back of the room if you wish to complete them. With that said, we go on to our main agenda item, which is the apologies for absence, please.
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any declaration of interest in matters coming before this meeting? Are there any? No, thank you. Item 3 is to receive the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 1 to 6. Are there any questions, comments? If not, can they be noted? Thank you very much. I can confirm all business this evening will be discussed in Part 1. There will be no Part 2 items to be considered this evening. Which moves us on to item 5, a review of the alligators in Hillingdon, our witness session, pages 7 to 16. A very warm welcome to our residents here this evening who've kindly given up their time to talk to the committee about their experiences with the gating scheme. And also present this evening we have our officers, Helena and Neil. We'll start with Helena and Neil to give the introduction of this item, and then we'll follow on with the comments from residents, please.
At the last meeting, the scoping report for this review was presented and accepted by the committee, and as part of the fact-finding, it was recommended that residents who had actually experienced the alligating scheme should be invited to attend so that they can share their experience of the process. So officers can listen and learn from their experiences, and that the councillors within the committee can ask questions as appropriate as well.
Thank you very much. A good evening again to our witnesses this evening. So just to be clear on what's going to follow now, so we will listen to each of you on your experiences of the gating scheme. That will then be followed by questions from members if there are any. So whenever you're ready, whoever goes first. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for inviting us to speak to your committee this evening. I'm Jane Turnbull, Chair of Oak Farm Residents Association. We cover an area to the east of Long Lane, London side, the A437, between Friesland Way, the A40 exit slip, and Clifton Gardens at the top of the hill at Long Lane. This area is unusual in that a large part of the estate was built or designed originally with vehicle access behind the houses. In some of the other roads, there's a narrower access path for pedestrian or bicycle access to a group of houses. Historically, the wider access was used by refuse vehicles, but the open alleys also resulted in easy entry for burglary, especially in the garages and garden sheds, and for fly tipping. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, chrysalis funding was made available to put in sturdy gates where the majority of residents in the road agreed to maintain the gates. Burglary numbers dropped immediately. However, no central record was kept of the lead residents who held the maintenance account and spare keys for each alley. Over the last several years, OFRA has been approached by residents about damaged gates and locks being broken or changed. We have asked for lead residents to contact OFRA in order to pass on these requests, but little response. Two major areas of concern are behind the shops at Ryfield Parade, where locks are regularly broken or changed, or the gates are left open, reducing the security of the homes behind those shops and allowing fly tipping. Last year, I was asked by borough officers to hold a key for a gate to the west of the shops on the north or odd-numbered side of Ryfield Parade. This was following a problem with access for emergency vehicles to the apartments above the shops. On the other side of the parade, between the shops and number 130 Ryfield Avenue, the gates and lock are often damaged, and fly tipping and drugs debris, the canisters, is often found behind the homes both on Ryfield Avenue and Midhurst Gardens. Also, problems are reported from the other side of Midhurst Gardens in the alleyway between Grosvenor Crescent houses. Ofra has not been able to find a contact for a lead resident there. We have tried several times. We also know of an instance where a property developer put his own gates across the alleys beside and behind a pair of semi-detached houses, cutting off a pedestrian access route onto Ryfield Avenue near the primary school. Unfortunately, action was not taken soon enough, and we understand that these gates cannot be removed now. But in another case, swifter action was taken and the footpath to Ryfield and Windsor Avenues was reopened and repaved. It was very nice. Ofra would be willing to keep a list of email or phone contacts for lead residents in charge of keys, and this would be held separate from our residents' emailing list. I'll pass you on to my colleague from Ofra who has other experiences.
Thanks, Jane. Thank you, Chair. I'm a lead resident I live on Deancroft Crescent, but I look after gates 11 in total. They are on Deancroft Crescent, Woodcroft Crescent and Grosvenor on one side, and Deancroft Crescent, Grosvenor Crescent, Windsor Avenue, Burley Road on the other side. The alleyway gates at Deancroft Crescent, Woodcroft Crescent and Grosvenor were installed in 2008. The reason that I helped with this is because fly tipping and burglaries were on the increase, as Jane has already mentioned. This happened to me personally, as behind my house somebody fly tipped a couple of lorry loads of tree cuttings, and then I was sent a letter impending prosecution from the council. Didn't have an idea that that was there at all. And then the alleyway gates at Deancroft, the second lot we put in, Grosvenor Crescent, Burley and Windsor were installed 2 years later in 2010. I was the main lead on those ones. Since their installation, there's been the maintenance, which I'm solely now responsible for, as people that helped me have either moved away or have never wanted to be involved with more than the initial start-up. The maintenance has been quite problematic in some areas because it's involved where the locks have been had to be replaced because they've been ground off. Locks have been broken, locks have been removed. Several occasions that's happened. This has all been unreported to me by the perpetrators, even though they do have my details. And they've all been residents, sadly, really, where that gate is, and it's happened on Grosvenor on those particular occasions. The other issues with the gates that have needed fixing is where gates have dropped because they've been in for so long and so many people use them, and the gate posts have been hit by a lorry in one instance. This has all come at a cost, and the maintenance fund, which is now dwindling. Currently, the post for gate posts at Deancroft Woodcroft Crescent on the Deancroft side needs resetting, as it is leaning and the gate cannot be closed properly now. I'm in the process at the moment of getting a couple of quotes. The Nationwide Building Society treasurer accounts, where they are both held or were held, have been since start-up now. They've closed them. They no longer support these type of accounts. So I'm waiting for the funds to be sent to me in the form of cheques, and then I will be needing to source another treasurer society account. The big thing as well is I'm planning on moving away from this area, possibly next year, or within the next 18 months. And I don't know what to do about the maintenance funds, and who to pass this on to, and the details about the all the details I hold about the alleyway gating schemes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Raj, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Raj Duty. I'm a resident of Parkfield Avenue. We've got a gating scheme between Parkfield Avenue and Denzoli Avenue, which is just behind the new Broadway on the Uxbridge Road. Our experience, very similar to what kind of Jane says, that the reasons behind why the gates were put was because to reduce burglaries, fly tipping, a lot of drug and alcohol use. The positive is that since the gates were put in probably about 17 or 18 years ago, all of those things have stopped. So the burglaries have reduced, got no more fly tipping, and there's not a lot of drug use, but obviously there are some open alleys behind the shops where people can get to. The disadvantage we've got is a lot of the residents who were part of the initial scheme have all moved away, so we don't have a lead person who's responsible for our gating scheme. And the other issue we've got is that the funds that were in the bank account, that bank account has now become dormant because it's had no use for a very long time. I've approached the bank to try and see whether those funds can be made available, and they said unfortunately not, unless we have a local kind of a neighbourhood watch kind of scheme in our, or local residents association in our area, which has obviously meant that any broken locks, residents are fixing those at their own cost. And now obviously the problem you always get is if you've got two gates, you have two sets of keys, and then new residents come and tenants move away, there's a cost of key cutting. So residents are funding that themselves when we obviously got this money in the bank account which we can't access. It's also meant that the maintenance of the gate hasn't been there. We haven't been able to paint it with anti-climb paint and things like that. So that's kind of, it's more, our problem is more from not having the funds available to kind of maintain those gates, and have a lead responsible person within our two streets that look after the gates.
Thank you very much for those very useful comments. What I will now do is invite questions from elected members. So if there are any questions, please indicate now. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. To all three of you, obviously there are problems with the alley gates. In your opinion, in either three of you, or your opinion, can you suggest any ways where this system can be improved? This alley gating system can be improved? Your thoughts, please. Thank you.
I think because obviously the funding and the gate scheme was initiated by the council, I personally think there needs to be a council responsible person who we can contact in order to get funding and obviously maintenance and things that have changed. There's obviously been questions about whether those gates should still remain there. Some residents have said whether the gates should move. We're all having those conversations with ourselves as neighbours, but I think we need a representative from the council that we can go to.
Councillor Sullivan, do you have a supplementary?
May I add
Sorry,
there?
okay.
I feel it would be very useful if there were at the very least a council-maintained record of the main key keepers, like Paulette, that would need to be reviewed every year or so that if Paulette knows she's going away, she can say, I'll be gone in a few months or years, and pass on the details that she has. And also perhaps somebody could find out who in Midhurst has keys for the half dozen gates that cause problems there. Thank you.
Paulette, would you like to say anything before I move on?
Sorry. Just really to add to what Jane said, because my problem will be that there will be some money left in the fund, and what do I do with it? Because I feel very guilty is the wrong word probably, but I'll have this money that doesn't belong to me. It's never been my money, and it's like that. Okay, there won't be a great deal left when I've done now. Going to sort out the post, but there still will be money that doesn't belong to me. So, who is responsible for that money? That's.
Thank you. Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chairman. Just two questions, if that's okay. First being to the two ladies from Ofra. If you you mentioned it briefly about collecting funds. Do you have a community fund account similar to Raj's? Do you keep them in personal accounts? And my second question, for after, is to you, Raj. Is it possible for yourselves? You said there's multiple residents who pay money themselves to fixing aspects of the gate, or fixing things or getting keys cut and whatnot. Has it been considered that a sort of another kind of bank account is opened for that, whilst the other one is being retrieved through whatever system? Just two questions. Thank you.
Each of the alleyway gating schemes, each road or pair of roads was treated individually, and a lead resident or a group of lead residents were required for each scheme to set up the nationwide treasury account, and the residents from the roads paid a sum into that and were given a key, and that account was meant to be used for maintenance and for cutting spare keys or new keys if residents moved. But what happened was very often the lead residents moved and the account sort of got lost or became dormant, and we've lost contact with lead residents on other roads. I know the ones that Paulette looks after. I know where the account is for the alleyway behind me because I passed it over to somebody. But other than that, I think there may be one other where there is a known resident, but that resident hasn't contacted Ofra. So I haven't got a file for that, whereas I think perhaps the council would be able to say, we need an address from you. As a residents association, I can't go knocking on the door and say, I want your address, please. So, thank you.
Sorry, Jane, can I just
add?
Oh, sorry. Just to clarify, when I set up the gates in 2008 and 2010, monies were collected, letters were drawn up, monies were collected for the setup of the gates, and luckily enough at the moment that has been what has gone into the maintenance fund. That is still there at the moment. But as I say, it's dwindling, maintenance has come out of that. So there were two funds set up on the two different gating societies, and at the moment I'm trying to sort of like look at other banks now, because Nationwide they don't do their treasurer's accounts anymore. So in the very beginning of setup, that was when the monies were collected. I think it was £35 per resident at that time. Okay, thank you.
So with our gating scheme, obviously all residents put, I think at the time it was like £50 per household into the scheme. Obviously there was the money that came in from the gating scheme as well. What was left over, on the top of my head, I think it's about £2,000 or £3,000, is still in that bank account, which has now become dormant. I would hazard a guess that probably that the people who paid into that bank account, we've probably only got something like 20% of those residents left in both those streets. So 80% of residents don't even know that there is this money that's kind of in a dormant account. In terms of broken locks and key cutting, individual residents are taking it upon themselves to cut keys or to repair a lock. I know a resident who went out and bought a kit to repair one of the locks. Or if you need a new lock, somebody would just go out and buy it. So there's not a matter of there isn't this separate pool of money that we can open up a second bank account with. it's accessing the pool of money that we had from 13 or 14 years ago. And obviously now, with things like checkbooks disappearing, it's now trying to work out what bank account we can have as residents, which will probably be digital or online, with access to maybe one or two people who may become our treasurers for the scheme.
No supplementary? Okay. Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming this evening. It's good to hear from you. I've written down some of the pitfalls that have, I need to sort of update, sort of fill in the gaps if I've missed anything. So, obviously, there's a maintenance cost, ongoing maintenance costs. There's the issue about keys, who has them when not people move away. And then this access with bank accounts seems to be the sort of the main issues that you've raised this evening. The issue with the bank accounts, it's education for me as well, because it's not something that I've been too deeply involved in, other than setting residents on the track to getting them. The bank accounts themselves, we're saying that you can only have specific types of bank accounts for this scheme. There's no other thing. So, is it because it's nationwide? Is it because it's a building society, or banks offer it as well? Banks do offer it as well. Okay. And if you've got someone that's new to your road, and the gate's obviously already in place, you've got keys. Is there a are you asking them for some sort of contribution to that account, or should you be doing that as a matter of course? Or if they don't want to participate in it, but they still need access to the back of the property, what sort of situation do you find yourselves in then?
A lot there. Okay, I'll start with the bank accounts. Nationwide just stopped, around 2020, they wanted to stop all the treasurers' accounts. It then turned out that because of COVID, they had to then put something else in place and leave it until it happened last year, December last year, that they stopped their treasurers' accounts. There are other places that do these type of accounts, Metro Bank being one of them, but I cannot get an account there because you need minutes. I don't hold meetings for the gating scheme, so I think the one that I was looking at, HSBC do one, but the better one that seemed to fit what I require is Lloyd's TSB. So when I get the money for, like, the checks through, that's who I'm going to, I think I've got to open it online, but it will be a bank maintained, so I can go into the branch and take the checks in. That's something that I'll look into once I've got them in my hands. The other area that you were talking about was if somebody moves into the area. I do post notes through, like letters through the doors when we've had a bit of an issue. Generally summertime, when the weather's better, myself and my husband tend to do a walk down the back alley and see if there's any issues. I don't have to, but it's just a thing that sometimes I do for our area. And if there is like a skip in the way or somebody's causing a bit of an issue, then I'll target that and I'll put a letter through. And all letters have my details on the bottom as neighbourhood watch coordinator, gating scheme coordinator. And when the weather gets better, I've got some signs printed out that go on the top of the gates with my number on. I don't put my name on there, but it's the Gating Society. And that leads them to giving me a call. And what should happen is that the key that the person, if they vacated the house, sold it on to someone else, the key should be handed over. Okay. In theory, a lot of the time it does happen, but a lot of the time you will find that they'll speak to their neighbours about the gates, and then they'll land either at my door or phoning me. And at the moment they're having to pay, it's the cost of what the cost of producing the keys, getting the keys cut. So I tend to get them cut. They're a £5 for one side of the road, because they decided at the very onset of having the gates put up, they didn't want the high security keys. On the gates on the other side, they are high security keys, so there's a slightly different process of getting those cut. They have to have either headed paper from myself or authorisation on an email from myself. There's only one person that cuts those keys. Yeah.
Councillor Farley, do you wish to follow up?
Thank you. And then I think, Raj, you said that you had, or the issue that you had particularly was because they wanted a neighbourhood watch scheme setting up, which is the reason why it was, well, that you couldn't access the funds. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. So our initial bank account was with the HSBC, the account that's become dormant. They've said to release those funds into a new account, we would have to have some sort of resident association with some sort of association number and minutes of meetings that we've held, because they can't release the funds to an individual, because it's okay. I live on Parkford Avenue, but I'm just a resident. That they need a little bit more on that. So similar challenges is that we need to have a resident association or a similar scheme set up. It has to be not mature, but it has to be running for at least 6 months, and then they can release the funds into a new bank account under that resident association for us to access them. Just to what you were saying about the key cutting for our street, it's literally, if you've sold your house or you're a tenant, you hand your key over. If you haven't, then the new occupiers will probably just knock on a neighbour's door and say, can I have a key cut? They'll borrow theirs, get the key cut at their own expense. The other issue with this gating scheme locks is the more keys you have cut over time, this is why the locks get damaged. And therefore then locks have to be changed, because you should be using original keys or keys cut from an original, but not a key that's probably been cut 20 or 30 times over the years.
Okay. So if I may, just on the back of that, so for the officers, is that this sort of issue with the banks and what kind of bank accounts are available, because it's part of the mechanism, is guidance given by council officers when the proposal for these allegate schemes goes to either streets or obviously waste associations is slightly different, but what's the communication, what actually is said and guided to them?
Yes, so in the past and as well at present, we do advise that when setting up a gating scheme to allow for extra money to be collected that can then be used for future maintenance costs, but that's pretty much as far as we go, just advise to do so, but we don't really offer advice on to where they can go to set up accounts or anything. I think by the sounds of things, that's something that we should look into.
If I can add that, and obviously these are quite some of our older schemes going back to 2008, 2010, and so things like we do actually, I think at that time it would be a very heavily like a paper-based system in terms of installing gates and maintenance. And we've actually had to, there weren't any online files that we could access in terms of, so we have actually, there is now we do hold a list of a central based list in terms of new schemes coming on board with people's contact addresses. So the system has changed very much since some of these experiences as well. And the other thing I would add is it's also in the context that a minimum scheme would be 5 households. Some of the schemes are much larger households. It's over 100 and whatever. So it has to be a system that's flexible to deal with all those scenarios as well. But as Neil says, there's a alligating information pack that's available online and a printed copy as well. And whilst we can't specify a particular bank to use or that kind of system, there is some guidance there in terms of setting that up. But that could be something that we could look to review as well. The other thing I would add, in the scoping report that was presented last month, we did highlight that new for this year, for schemes installed more than 10 years ago, there is now a discretionary option from the Cabinet member to support the repair of replacements of gates where a scheme has been successful for 10 years or so. So we recognise that that is an issue for established schemes, and that the council can have a role in helping those schemes where the gates have been successfully managed by residents themselves. So that pilot has been running this year, and that gives existing schemes the opportunity to apply to have their gates refurbished, or like you said, sometimes the gates have slipped, on the same basis that it's a 90% Christmas fund with a 10% contribution from residents. But that's also the opportunity for the council to write out in terms of the lead resident, and whether there's other residents who might want to be able to take on that role or be interested in that role. So basically we can refresh schemes which have been in existence for 10 years also. But that, like I said, that's something new that we've been piloting this year, but I think I'm hoping that will be something that will be of interest and of use to residents as well.
Thank you. Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. As I've listened, I was just a little bit surprised that this wasn't from originally. There's almost like an overarching organisation that kind of looks after this, like almost like, I don't know, Alligates R Us Hillingdon or something, that kind of overarching, and then almost like scout groups, right? You've got the Scout Association, and all the scout groups sit underneath it. It's almost like all the Alligate people sit underneath it. And I think if something like that existed, tell me if I'm wrong, please, that would be quite helpful, because it would solve a lot of the problems with, you know, people who may move or may have been the lead person or maybe in charge of the bank account, meaning that ultimately this organisation above can, if needs be, step in and help reorganise, but also it may save some of the problems that Raj was saying around, you know, minutes and constitutions. And as somebody who has tried to set bank accounts up for charities and other things, they do require all sorts of bits and bobs, which sometimes are difficult if you're a small amount of residents. So I don't know, I guess my question is, if something like that existed and it was possible, not making any promises, would that be something that would interest residents? Well, that might be something to go away from, Chair.
I can see heads nodding, but if you wish to comment, feel free to do so.
Yes,
A resounding
yes. We would find that very useful, having somebody who knows what's going on and can keep that record, because we do have problems. We can only keep contact details if somebody gives them to us, and I can ask for people to pass on details, but it hasn't happened. I've been asking for some years. Thank you.
And I guess it doesn't have to be cumbersome on the overarching organisation. Most of the work will be done by you. The only time they'd ever step in is A, when you needed to do things with bank accounts, because it would clearly be there, and secondly, if someone died or moved or something happened. So maybe that's something that we in our review could look into.
Thank you very much for those contributions. Councillor Gardner.
It's a good idea, but it's supposed to be a self-help, and the only help that the council get involved in is the financial help. I've been a councillor long enough to remember when all this started, to be perfectly honest with you. I suppose it's directed at you, Helena. Some of the newer alligators that have been put in, people are leaving them open. They're not going to do anything with them. They've got fly tipping. They've got what do you do then? I mean, my attitude would be remove them if the residents don't want them, and they're not going to maintain them and close them. Have you thought about that?
And I think, as you said at the outset, Councillor Gardner, it is a resident-led scheme, and it relies on residents using the gates as intended, which means closing them behind them and using them properly. It's difficult to comment on specific cases because we don't necessarily have the background information to hand at this meeting. But if there are scenarios that you would like us to look into, then certainly that's something that we could offer as well. I don't know, was there a specific? Right. And I think it also may vary where schemes have been led by residents as opposed to where schemes have been led by businesses as well.
Yeah.
Anything further to add, Councillor Gardner?
Yeah, I'm intrigued at why the police aren't involved in this, because you're actually helping them in a way by putting the gates there to stop antisocial behaviour and criminal activity. Do they ever get involved in terms of, originally, many, many years ago, that when this scheme was introduced, there was talk about the police having sets of keys for these gates so that they could go around, because people still can get into the alleys. I'm well aware of that. But do the police provide any help? I know you're going to say no, I just look at your face.
Previously, our Safer Neighbourhood team, or whatever they were called 5 years ago, were very, very good. They used to go around and they would post on Facebook and possibly Twitter where they'd been. You could follow their beat. And regularly they'd say, come on Ryfield shops, the gates are open, you're letting the security down. And then that would happen a few times, and then it would be, well done, the gates were both closed at Ryfield. And you'd know what's going on. We've had a change of personnel on the SNT team, and they're finding their way around the estate yet, so that sort of thing is not happening. It was useful, but unless you know who's got a key, you can't just go up and shut a gate. Otherwise you might be blocking a tradesman in, or making life difficult for somebody, which I do sometimes passing the shops, because I know I've got a key. So they can come and get it from me. But it would be nice if the police were helping, and yes, we are helping them, but they do have a lot on their plates. If the residents would help themselves, I think it would help the police enormously as well. Thank you.
Any further questions from members? No? Perhaps I can just ask the officers if they'd like to comment on any of the things that have been raised in this presentation this evening.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, like I say, we have our purpose today was to listen and to take on board your feedback, and we have made extensive notes as well. As I said previously, I think the opportunity to refresh historic schemes would be something that would be very useful and welcomed by residents as well. And what we'll want to be acting on is the overall review from the whole review and that feedback as well. But like I say, it's very useful to hear from residents themselves. I think as part of our process, when gates are newly installed, we go back to residents to ask them what they thought about the process. But it is also good learning on our part to be able to go back to residents from older schemes in terms of how they've worked out as well.
Thank you, and can I just end by thanking again our witnesses for their attendance this evening. Their comments and contributions have been invaluable and will help us greatly for our review, and I would encourage you to watch our meetings going forwards over the course of this review to see if you feel we've missed anything, or if you wanted to add anything further to what you've already told us this evening. You are more than welcome to contact myself, or the clerk, or any of the members on the panel to give any further feedback. But my thanks again for your attendance, and you're free to go if you wish to do so. You can stay if you like, and that also applies to the officers as well. So we're going to move on to our next item now, but thank you once again. Item 6 is the Community Infrastructure Levy and 106 Monitoring Annual Reports, pages 17 to 54. Welcome to Julia this evening, who will be leading on this presentation to the members. Whenever you're ready, Julia.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Councillors. Yes, so I'm just here to introduce the report, which is looks back to the 2021-22 financial year, and it reports on the Community Infrastructure Levy and Section 106 contributions we received, and those monies are planning obligations that are paid to the Council to mitigate the impacts of developments. Community Infrastructure Levy is usually applied at a more strategic level, and Section 106 tends to deal with more site-specific impacts, and the money tends taken to deal with issues much closer to the site. So The other thing I just wanted to highlight was, I think when we've been to committee before, we've talked about our monitoring system. So just to flag, during this financial year that we're reporting on, in November 2021, we actually implemented a new monitoring system called Exacom. Because we bought it in mid-year, we haven't got the full benefits in terms of the information we can provide, because obviously we've had to do some retrospective work. But obviously next year, when we have a full year on the system, there is more detail. But you'll see from the infrastructure funding statement that's appended to this report that we have been able to set out in more detail the types of contributions we've been receiving and where we've been spending the money in more detail than we have done previously. But I'll just take you through the headlines of the report and then obviously answer any questions. So starting with SIL, you'll see in Table 1 that we, in terms of Hillingdon SIL, so that's the charge that we levy on development, there is a separate SIL that we also collect for the Mayor. We received £6.8 million last year, and of that we spent 1.7. And then you'll see in Table 2 a little bit more detail in terms of how that money is split up. SIL, although it comes in as one contribution, has to be split out 3 ways in terms of how we spend the money. So 80% of it is what we call strategic SIL, and that is spent on specifically infrastructure to deal with the impacts of development. And you'll see that we spent £450,000 towards the West Drayton Leisure Centre in that year. And then approximately 15%, I think it was a little higher last year, 1.3 is used to fund the Chrysalis programme, and we've got a list in the report of all the items that were funded through that funding. And then we take an administration fee that pays for officer time and the system that we use in order to monitor SIL. And you'll see the report says that £450,000 was spent on West Drayton Leisure Centre, and the intention is that any of the remaining unspent strategic SIL, so that's about £4.7 million, is intended to be spent on the West Drayton Leisure Centre in future years, and that is allocated by Cabinet through the budget report. Obviously the work's only just started last financial year and ongoing through the next 2 financial years. There's no limit on when SIL can be spent, so it can be carried forward from one financial year to the next to be spent, and that is the intention with the remaining funds. And then turning just to Section 106, you'll see in the 2021-22 financial year we received 8 million and we spent about 3.4. And it is important to say that the way SIL comes in, the money that's received in one year isn't necessarily the money that's spent in one year. There's a sort of time lag as developments go forward, so it's not kind of money in, money out, and that's why we do tend to hold a balance, because there does take time to spend some of that funding. And you'll see just under paragraph 15 of the report, a summary of the money that was spent by theme. There is a bit more information in the infrastructure funding statement about the individual projects that was spent on. And that's not as a full list at the moment, because we're still going back and having to input money, because the money's spent in a different year and it's received. Some of the money that we are spending was received 3, 4, 5 years ago, and as we're bringing the new system up to speed, we're having to go back and input that. So if you do have questions about specific spend, we'll probably be able to pull that together for you if you want us to do that. And I guess that's the summary, so happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Julia. I invite questions from members. Councillor Gardner.
Unfortunately, you haven't put the areas where the monies from the areas that are spent in the areas where the developments and disruptions take place. I mean, I represent Hayes Town Ward, and an incredible amount of money must have come in from the old vinyl factory, development, things like that. But I would like, if possible, to have a list of things that SIL money has been spent on in the area, because it's the area and the people that suffer with the disruption, if you follow me. And there's also the site down Clayton Road, I think, is coming to, there's lots of areas that I just wonder if we could know where the particular money that's come in for developments has gone off to be spent, because, you know, I'd be quite cheesed off if money that's come in and we need things in, for example, Hayes Town Ward is this spent in Ruislip or Northwood or other wards. So can you do that?
We can generate a list of where the money, where the money is received by ward. As you'll see from the table, the money is then all collected together, and spent specifically on that West Drayton Leisure Centre. So that is where the money that we received last year, in terms of every contribution, is being allocated towards that one project. So that's the decision that's made by Cabinet.
Councillor Gardner, anything further to add? No. Okay. Councillor Gohill?
Thank you, Chairman. My question's around the admin fees that the council collects. Since everyone's costs have gone up and inflation's gone up, and in general, is the 4% that the council's taking in, is that still enough to cover the labour costs, etc., needed to collect this money? Because I understand there's probably extortionately large amounts of time spent collecting these from developers, especially for the funds going to the mayor, and I just want to make sure that we're covering our costs for that appropriately.
Yes. No, it's as it's a percentage, it does go up and down depending on the actual income that we receive each year. So last year was actually, in terms of still income, just nearly 6.9 million was one of our largest years, whereas this year, where we're feeling much more of the economic downturn, we're tracking much lower than that, which does limit that. Unfortunately, the legislation we have does cap us at 5% in terms of what we can take. But what we have been trying to do is, where there's a strong year, putting some of that money in a reserve so that we're able to manage the pressure in different years. But yeah, the other thing is that the SIL charge goes up each year with indexation. So in January each year, we get an indexation figure. It's sort of linked to the cost of building materials. It comes from that, and we are allowed to uplift the actual SIL rate that we charge by that sort of inflationary measure. So the money that we collect from the developments permitted in that year will be slightly higher than the previous year to reflect that, and then obviously then the percentage that we take can take that into account. So there is a bit of kind of inflation going on in there.
Councillor Gohill, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you. I noticed we charge 4%, and you said that the limit is 5%. What would sort of trigger the need to increase that if necessary, and is that something that we as a council can help with?
Yeah, it's actually probably the report's confusing. So there's two administration charges. The 4% is the charge we take for collecting the mayor's SIL, and that's the maximum, and then there's a 5% we take for collecting Hillingdon SIL. So we do take the maximum on both of those. Apologies for not clarifying that.
Thank you very much. Any further questions, Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo what Councillor Gardner was saying, it's just for transparency, we know by ward where the income is coming from. So that would be handy. On the Section 106, my saying is it's time limited for spend.
Some contributions are, yeah. But some are not.
Are we at risk with any not spending it in time, and how much would that be? Do we know?
Yeah, we have a schedule that tracks anything that's within 18 months of deadline. So typically, if there is a deadline to spend, it's usually about 7 years from when the money's received, which does give us quite a good time frame. But yeah, we have a spreadsheet. We only have one contribution this financial year that has actually been allocated and is going out the door. So we do keep track of it, and we are monitoring those. So yeah.
Any further questions? Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. Just to ask how we involve residents, especially with the Section 106 money, how we involve residents associations, community groups that may be impacted by whatever has caused that Section 106 money to come to us, and how we involve them in helping to make the decisions on how it is spent. Thanks, Chair.
It's a front-loaded process through the planning application. So the actual heads of terms, what we negotiate is set through when the decision's taken at planning committee. So what we do is respond to the consultation responses we get when we consult on the planning application, and any issues that are raised by residents or by other statutory partners in terms of there's a demand on a particular service, or there's an issue on a road, then that will be in the officer's report. We will pick that up and link that to the contribution. So it's very much fed in at that stage, and then once the money is received, we are bound to spend the money on what it was agreed for in that agreement. So hopefully that then reflects that we're addressing the impact.
Okay. Councillor Punja.
That answer just confused me, so I just would like a bit of clarification, sorry. And I'm new to this, so I really like that clarification. So if you're saying that you take it from planning, then planning, but the money comes from everywhere. So if you're putting all the money into, let's say, West Drayton and Useley Leisure Centre rather than West Drayton Leisure Centre, and a couple of errors in the report there of where the location is and stuff, how do you get that? Say if there was something happening in Yedding or something, built, you're collecting the money from there, how they wouldn't have said that they wanted it in West Drayton, for example. So
yeah, no, it is confusing because we're talking about two different types of planning obligations. So the one Councillor Gardner was questioning was SIL, which is not as site specific. So it's more like a tax or a levy. So it's linked to the amount of floor space the development's delivering. There's a fixed charge, and that comes in and is kind of pooled as a central resource to then spend on generally the larger strategic infrastructure that kind of has an impact borough-wide. And then the other type that Councillor Small was talking about is Section 106, which are more about the planning application. So if a planning application, for example, you need to put a new access in, road access in, or there's an impact on a local school that we need to build an extension to that school, then we can tie that into the planning application, and that specific application will make a contribution towards those requirements, and they're very much more local to the development site, and that's kind of locked in. So the legal agreement will say that the access needs to be on Road X, and it needs to be on a primary school within the area, or if it's an improvement to the park. And we do have an overview that it does go within that local area. It's much more tied to the site. So it just depends on the type of contribution that we're talking about.
I think that's all the questions asked now, so I'll end on that note. And Julia, thank you very much for your contribution this evening. You may leave if you wish to do so. We will now move on to item 7, which is parking and modern technology delivery drivers, pages 55 to 64. Good evening to you, Roy. Whenever you're ready, please give your presentation to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. I've set out a bit of a background about parking enforcement, which normally gets very interested with people because most people use it. Prior to July 1994, it was undertaken by the police, and then the 4th of July, Independence Day, in London, it transferred over to all the councils. Originally, Hillingdon done it directly, but it was outsourced in 2003 and has been since then. Currently, we deploy 22 officers a day, and we're right across the borough. We do concentrate on hotspots. Hayes Town is one of the very hotspots we do concentrate, as Councillor Gardner will know. But we do spread right the way across the borough, and there's a mixture of foot patrols, car patrols and bike patrols. I've set out some areas where we use technology within the system. In the early days, there used to be very big, chunky handheld computers, and more they've now kind of moved into almost mobile telephones, Samsungs, and equipment like that. And the officers use that to actually gather all the evidence of the contravention that they witness, and that is used to generate a paper ticket that is issued. As part of that, they do collect photographs. The photographs are then available to the members of the public, so they can actually see what evidence was there. If it happens to be a CCTV PCN, there's also a video taken, and members of the public can see that as well. As part of the system that operates the handheld computers, there's also a back office process which ensures that the PCN that is issued is collected. If somebody wishes to appeal against it, and there's a number of ways they can appeal, and that it makes it as easy as they can for that. It's quite an informal basis for people to appeal, and the system actually allows people to log on. They can see all the photographs online. They can decide whether they wish to appeal at that stage, or they can pay at that stage. There's kind of advice systems in an FAQ system provided, which kind of explains to people what kind of reasons are more likely to be supported, such as if there was a medical emergency, and what evidence they would be best placed to provide to support that. But even if the system was to suggest that their appeal would be unlikely, there's nothing to stop them appealing. They all have the right to appeal and put forward any mitigation they like. We are in the process over this summer of introducing a chatbot as well, to try and make it easier for people to interact with the system. And we have this year introduced a QR code on the PCNs that people, if they, rather than having to put in the website and actually go and visit the website, they can just use a QR code to access straight into the system, and it will pre-populate the information so they can go straight in and look at their ticket. And it's just to try and make it a bit easier for them to either appeal or to pay PCN, whichever they wish to do. CCTV enforcement is used, but there was a change in legislation in 2015, which means you can only use it for parking matters in certain areas, which are school keep clears, bus lanes, bus stops, and on red routes. We are allowed to use them for things, moving traffic contraventions such as banned turns, no entry points, that type of thing. But for parking, there's only those restricted areas. Whilst two different types of CCTV system. One is an attended one, where someone is watching it and moving the camera at the time, and also an unattended one, where it captures details of the contravention. We use an unattended one, and it captures details of the contravention, the video, and the vehicle registration number, and that is sent into the back office, where it has to be reviewed by a specially trained officer to ensure, yes, it's the evidence that it's collected is correct, and that it does actually show that a contravention has occurred. If it doesn't, for instance, if they was to be in a queue of traffic outside a school, it might think that they parked on the school keep clear markings. That would be rejected at that stage. We have, up until early this year, we had a paper-based permit system, and people could apply online, but they'd have to provide their documents. It was done by post. It would take a couple of weeks to process through, typically a couple of weeks. We've introduced a virtual system now, so in the same way that the TAC disc is virtual, that they don't have to display a permit. It enables residents to go online, upload their documents, apply at a time that suits them, and typically they're turned around within a day. So it makes that process much, much quicker for residents now, much easier to access. And that also includes visitors' vouchers, the old scratch-off vouchers. They can do that online. So where before they would have to go to a library, or they'd have to send in and wait for it to be posted to them, it removes that delay. The system was rolled out in June 2022, and there is just under 7,000 virtual residence permits on issue, and we have about 14,500. So we're all virtually at 50% in a short period of time, which is, and as the rest of the permits expire over next year, they will transfer onto virtual as well. We are conscious that some residents don't have access to the internet or have vulnerabilities that mean they can't access the system, and for residents such as that, we do have a paper-based system where we will either give them the additional support, and we will upload the permit on their behalf. In some cases, there are still a few paper permits for vulnerable residents, so there's only a small number of those, but those arrangements are there just to capture anybody that isn't able to use the system. The handheld computers that the CEOs use, they also include a GPS tracking system, so we're able to effectively follow them around. If they have an emergency incident, they can press the button, it sends out a code red, and then the back office team can see exactly where they are. They can send people there to support. They can send the police if they needed. Unfortunately, verbal and physical attacks are an issue within the parking enforcement industry. So that's one thing there, but it also helps us to be able to see where the people are visiting, what kind of frequency. I think sometimes I get inquiries and I'm able to say, I know we visited that street 700 times, we've only issued 10 tickets. And so I can actually see that people have been there, when they've been there. And it helps us to kind of look at trends and make sure we've got people in the right place. If we get requests for assistance, such as a resident says, my drop curb is blocked, we can see the nearest officer and we can ping them a message direct straight to their handheld to say, please go to number 1, the High Street. And we know they're 2 minutes away or they're 10 minutes away. ANPR is used in a lot of car parks, in private car parks typically. Councils are not allowed to use it for enforcement purposes. It's a government directive at the moment. But we are allowed to use it for management purposes. So the handheld computers also have an ANPR type scanner on them. So they could be in a car park, they could walk along, scan in the registration numbers, and it would tell them what ones have got permits, what ones haven't. So if they go to issue a ticket and the system hasn't recognised it, if they put the registration number in, it will ping up, this one has a permit, and they can check further from there. We also use body-worn cameras on all of our officers. They, as part of the health and safety of keeping them safe, they provide good evidence to the police where people do have incidents. Had been used in a number of prosecutions as well. It's also been found that using the body-worn cameras, once people know they're there and they're being recorded, it does help to defuse situations as well. We do regularly receive complaints that the CEO said this, the CEO said that, and we're able to check those and take any appropriate training action or kind of understand that they didn't say what they're alleged to have said. So they're very useful from that point of view. We're currently trialling. I said in here that the cashless parking system, mobile phone parking system, that many of you will probably be aware of, is due to be tested. Well, I'm actually testing it now. It's been released to me for test. It took us. We had to have the software amended to accommodate the Hillingdon first differential parking tariffs system, and that's being tested now. Will be rolled out shortly. And once that's live, again, in the same way that they can see the virtual permit on their system, they'll be able to see the virtual parking paying display ticket on the system, and so people won't then need to go to a pay and display machine and get a ticket and display it. But if this is an additional service, so if people still wish to use coins and cards at the pay and display machines, they will be able to. We also was asked to comment on delivery drivers. Now, clearly they've become, since the pandemic in 2020, it's expanded, and virtually every high street you can see a proliferation of them on cars, bikes and bicycles now. Previous to the pandemic, we did have delivery vehicles, but many of them tended to be linked to one shop and owned by the shop. Such as a pizza shop would be delivering. If you had problems, you could target enforcement just at a specific area. You could also engage with the shop, because the shop's management, because you knew who they were. Most of the delivery drivers now are self-employed. I'm aware that there's quite a lot of them that used to do minicab driving, and when the pandemic hit, to maintain their income, they moved on to deliveries, and then realised that doing deliveries meant they didn't have to run a car, they don't have people shouting at them, so that they stayed doing that. unfortunately, we do get lots of complaints about delivery drivers who are felt to be a nuisance by some and a blessing by others. We get people complaining that they're intimidating them just by the sheer numbers that are there at times. We do target enforcement around known hotspots, and it tends to be there's more and more hotspots now. It's not just the primary high streets. Anywhere with a couple of food delivery places tend to get a little gathering of them. But as legislation only allows us to take enforcement action by serving a PCN, and it means serving it, we have to either put it on the vehicle, hand it to the driver, and the only time we can get round that is if the enforcement officer is stopped by doing so by either threats of violence or actual violence. We have had issues where officers have been physically attacked, verbally attacked, and at times we've had them with kind of 10 to 15 delivery drivers around one person. So there we will tend to send a number of officers to one site. Unfortunately, because most of the vehicles are attended, once an officer arrives, they leave and they come back a little while later once the officer's there, and so I always use a term that's like herding chickens. It really is a significant problem. It's not just a problem in Hillingdon; it's a problem across the nation. We regularly engage with London councils and other local authorities about what works, what's been tried, and the general feedback is working with the police tends to work, and we do that where we're able to, but where the police are able to give us kind of support. We've done exercises where we've turned up with a parking enforcement officer, the police have turned up, and the police do things like MOT checks, insurance checks, make sure the bike is legal. We've had it where bikes have been seized as well, which is puts a strong message out to people. But there's such a proliferation of them that it's the next day it's back again. We are continuing to work with the police where we can, and we work with our colleagues in environmental enforcement, and that's for things like littering and that as well. But as I said, the term herding chickens really is a bit of an issue, and it's not something just unique to Hillingdon. We have tried, and we are currently working, where we're trying to work with one of the business owners, who's a franchise owner for a fast food outlet, to say, are you able to provide some controls? Because if not, we're going to kind of flood the area of enforcement and make your life difficult, which will affect your business. And they only have limited powers with them, because many of them are self-employed. But we are trying that as a way of working, and hopefully they will have, being a primary user of the delivery service, they will have a bit more influence than we will have as someone that's trying to stop them being there. It's something that we will keep on doing. We will keep abreast of what happens, and we are trialling some areas such as amending observation periods before a ticket is given. But if you've got 10 people there, by the time they issue one ticket, the rest have gone. And that's it from me, Chair.
Thank you. I have some members wishing to ask questions already, so we'll start with Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you very much, Chair. And if there's any topic that gets my, I don't know what the words are, blood boiling, it's certainly this one, as I think I have made clear on this select committee before. I just wondered how we are seriously working with franchisees and businesses to deal with this. Certainly in my own ward of Ruislip, if you were to, and I know that the McDonald's franchisee is more than happy to work with the council, but it's been limited so far. He is more than happy where there is serious incidents, and I don't just mean parking incidents, I mean where people are abusing women, which they have done in my ward. People are being violent towards young people, being violent towards things. Where there are these serious incidents, he's happy to stick their number plate into his machine and ban them. Because the one very positive thing about the rising is that actually the market's there's quite a competition for the market to be able to do those. So actually, it's not like the market's completely saturated and they're desperate for drivers. Losing a few in an area is more than able to do. What are we doing in the hotspots where we know that if somebody lost a particular shop in that high street, it would almost make it difficult for them, and then telling others within the borough that this person has gone around, they've abused somebody, they've behaved badly, can you ban them from collecting from you? What are we doing almost to inform others around that and working with it? What are we also doing, and I'm afraid that some of the community enforcement officers that I have witnessed, not all, but some are have become quite chummy with some of the delivery drivers, and just, in my opinion, are turning a blind eye. That's also been reported back to me by shopkeepers that we work with in my ward, and I don't know whether that happens in other members' ward, but they just become chummy and therefore they don't deal with it, but they will just slap a ticket on somebody who accidentally doesn't put a ticket on when they're trying to grab a bottle of milk. And what are we doing? Have we looked at other councils? I'm particularly interested in the work that my colleagues in Brentwood and Ongar are doing around not banning delivery drivers from high streets, but trying to find spaces for them in particular car parks where if they are registered, they will get a sort of a 15-minute leeway, so they can go and collect it and come back and won't be ticketed in the car park. This is an issue that residents are very, 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 very conscious of. They're very anxious about, and they are cluttering up our high streets whilst recognising that these people are trying to do a job. They are just trying to provide for their families. But there's got to be, I think we need to work as hard as we can to try and square the circle as much as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Ruislip is the area we're trying to primarily work with the franchise, and I think you've mentioned who it is. One of the things we're looking to do there is to actually provide a parking area kind of segregated to keep them in. One of the things that was explained by the franchisees is that many of the drivers will park where they park because when they have to leave, if they go a different route, the actual delivery company will say you've followed the wrong route. So if they was to get the job and be parked around the corner in a bay, they would get a black mark against them. So we're looking to look at kind of provision of parking bays there and how that would work. And we're also looking at where else we can put bays, short-term motorcycle bays, primarily motorcycle bays, to actually kind of give them somewhere to actually go and manage that. Now, when you say community support officers, did you mean the parking enforcement officers? Okay, yeah. Unfortunately, the parking enforcement officers do get a lot of abuse, and when they turn up, they will try and move them on because they know they're not going to get many tickets on them. But if there's particular instances where they're turning a blind eye, we would certainly look at that. My team do undertake covert and overt checks to make sure that they are enforcing properly. And if we was to see something that was wrong, we would take the appropriate staff management action with those officers. And again, the body-worn camera footage that I mentioned earlier is something that helps to support that one way or the other as well. So what was you said Brentford and Ongar?
Yeah. The work that I think you kind of answered it, and potentially the trying to find spaces for them to be, and then in potentially car parks where there's potentially sectioned off bays and car parks aren't busy and they can walk. Might not work with every high street, but
I mean certainly Ruislip is a good example. You've got a couple of car park, the King's End North car park behind. There's a little dead area in that, and we're looking to put them in there and segregate it off so that then, because previously we'd done a high level of enforcement, and what we end up doing, we would push them into the car parks, and then we started getting complaints from the car parks users that they were intimidating them in there. So we're trying to find an area where we can put them where they've got almost their own entrance exit, so they're not engaging with the rest of the car park, and they've got somewhere where they can stop shortly. I mean, I see more and more now that there's bicycle delivery people that, we have very, very little we can't issue a ticket to them. And if they're cycling on the footway or something like that, then it effectively that becomes a police matter. And we do regularly meet with the police as well, and we raise any kind of issues to that. And that's where we end up getting police support from as well, to actually go and do some joint exercises.
Councillor Small, do you have a supplementary?
I do, thank you, Chair. I just wondered if we can really look, and I don't know whether this will work within law, but look at those big franchises or those big outlets where if you don't have them in the borough, you're really going to struggle to do it. And McDonald's, Burger King, others in other wards that there may be, to try and get some cross-community. So where there are serious levels of abuse, that everybody is punching in that person's code and saying, unfortunately, that person who is abusing women, is abusing our parking officers, is being, particularly difficult, is no longer going to be able to pick things up from those franchises. I don't know whether there's something we can do for the high-end stuff to really try and stamp down on this and almost share the information about who these particularly difficult drivers are. I recognise that the people parking inconsiderately and us not liking it is a more complicated thing, and that's going to be an area-by-area basis working with ward councillors, but where this serious abuse is happening, surely we could be sharing that information and making sure we're stamping it out.
I would need to look into that a bit further, and I could update you offline or via Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're certainly happy to note that in the minutes and have that as an action point to be updated in the near future. Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got two questions here. I did have three, but Councillor Smallwood covered the third one, so thanks for that. The first one is I often get reports from residents saying people who've kind of gone past their ticketed time on a high street or a council car park in particular, they often say, oh, well, isn't there like a buffer limit, a time limit? Could you provide some clarity on if there actually is, and if there is, how long it is, so we can go back and say, yes, there is, and it's like 5 minutes, or no, there isn't at all, get back before your ticket ends. And the second question is just around enforcement officers in CPZ zones. So I have a particular problem in my ward specifically where people who want to play on the Brunel playing fields on a Sunday morning park on residential streets where there is a CPZ in place on a Sunday, but it's only if they call that someone kind of comes down, but it's a weekly issue. How many times? So my question is, how many times do residents have to call in order for it to kind of get onto a rota for the CEOs to kind of come along regularly? Thank you.
Could you use your microphone, please?
Sorry, Chair. We use observation periods to assess whether someone is parking legally and, say, loading or unloading. They do vary from place to place. If they're parked on a footway, then it's an instant ticket. Typically, it tends to be 5 minutes, but there are ones of 3 minutes, and they are something that we are reviewing with the current cabinet member, with a view that they would be published somewhere along the line as well. So, if there's certain areas that you'd like me to look at, I can come back to you offline on that one. With the CEOs in CPZs, on Monday to Saturday, we have every beat is covered. At weekends, we have more of a skeleton service. Sundays and bank holidays are more of a skeleton service. We'd only say deploy 7 or 8 enforcement officers. Some will be in areas of known concern. Others will be mobile. I would expect the officers to be picking up if something's coming in about somewhere regularly. They should do that. If you'd like to share with me offline where it is, I will go away. Because I said I can actually go and see what many times they visited and when they visited, and I can address that because I would expect them to be learning from the calls they get.
Yeah.
Councillor Punja.
Thank you, Chair. I share Councillor Smallwood's bane with delivery drivers, and we have discussed it, I think, numerous times anyway. and I'm just putting some stuff out there at this moment because it really annoys me, and I haven't been somebody who has been intimidated and abused on the high streets by trying to move people, these delivery drivers on. I feel that it's an issue that I kind of wish is taken, we'll find answers to, maybe, let's say. But criminalising them isn't potentially the way forward, I don't think, because they are people who are looking, it's their job, and they are trying to find ways. So I just wonder, because this is, we have car parking spaces, but when 2 bikes take up 1 car parking space, or 1 bike takes up a car parking space, that car parking space could potentially have 6 bikes on there, which would then change the problem. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But for me, that would, because it would mean that they would not be one bike in 1 car parking space spread across the high street, but they would all be in that space there, which could be, I don't know, potentially an option. The other option is, I don't know whether drivers are licensed with the borough at all, so that they have to kind of have some code of conduct, or, I don't know if that happens, or if that's something that could happen. But having a license to be able to be that delivery driver, so that it's not just with their operating self-employed, but they also have to have a license within the borough to operate. Maybe that's a way of monitoring what happens in this space. Because if you're just going to go and look at working in and punching in a number plates can be changed very easily. People can come in and out, and I just feel there would have another kind of issue there. Moving on from just like delivery drivers, this is also taking space within taxi cab firms who are parking in spaces, mechanics who are putting their cars into private land spaces, and we have no control over any of this as well. So those people who buy their houses or rent properties cannot park in their own parking spaces because they've got overweighted mechanics companies or taxi companies using that space, and they don't care because they are intimidating, and they will just go and damage other vehicles in there. That happens quite a lot in my ward. And what can we do about that? And also when these organisations, whether they're delivery drivers, whether they're businesses doing this, when they're going into private land, and it basically then jeopardises emergency services going into that land. That is a problem, and time and time again, what I'm hearing is we can't do anything about it. It's private land. We have to talk to the managing agents. The managing agents don't care and don't do anything about it. But when we have a fatality, that becomes a big issue, and we can't have that kind of relationship with managing agents or landlords of properties, basically. That kind of needs to change. But I'd like us to be more innovative than criminalising these drivers, and finding better ways in which we can offer them the opportunity to do their job, whilst also enabling me as a councillor, as a resident, and as a business owner to also do my job too.
Okay, thank you. At the moment, they aren't required to be licensed to work in the borough. They're not licensed to have to work in the borough. They effectively just drive. They're people just visiting. And I don't know if any work's been done about whether that it's possible to license them. But certainly with the the mini cabs and that, I think it might be a very long uphill thing. But I will certainly have a look at that. Parking in private areas is we're not permitted to do that. We're only out. What we enforce is the traffic management orders, which cover the public land. When it goes off road, it then becomes it's a private matter between the landowner and the people. As much as we would like to go and enforce it, it's not something we're legally able to do so. There is there was legislation brought in place to enforce in private land a number of years back, and previously in private land they would typically go along and they would clamp people, and you'd get the cowboy clamper stories in the media, and that was changed so that they can issue tickets, and they can enforce properly, but they can't claim it, but they can issue tickets. There is an independent appeal service available, and that is going through further legislation at the moment to bring it in line with effectively how councils operate now with parking and an independent parking appeals service. But legally we're not entitled to do that. It's your personal land, or it's the landowner's personal land. I'm not sure there's anything we can do there apart from encourage people to put pressure on the landowner or their landlord or the managing agent to actually bring some controls in. But I've seen many cases where the managing agents have brought controls in, and then we end up with complaints saying they won't let me park here. I need this type of parking. They won't allow me, and our hands are tied, unfortunately, in that area. Criminalising them, did you mean by issuing parking tickets and that type of thing?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's a difference, because it's very hard on... It's very hard with motorbikes, for example, to, they're there and they're gone, and then it's just like a resource chase. You're chasing your tail almost. And I just kind of feel that if you took a bay and, like McDonald's is one, Nice High Street is in one space, and then you've got KFC right the way up the other. A delivery driver is not going to go 10 minutes apart, 10 minutes away from either of those to go, because they've got to be in and out very quickly. Like in Useley, for example, you've got all the way down the high street, but you've got a very narrow high street, so it's really, really dangerous. And I almost feel that if you could have a bay and just put 6 and that's there, and then a few meters, I don't know, a block down or something, there would be another 6 for accommodate another group of takeaways. Maybe one of the things is we don't have so many takeaway places on our high streets. It'd be a great thing. But I'm just trying to kind of like say that when you see 2 motorbikes taking the space of 1 parking bay, and you've got your lunch hour and you're trying to go and drive in, go to the bank or go and do something else, or just pop to the high street, it's becoming really, really difficult. And you can't move them on, you can't do anything. But if they had those occupancies where those bays were, I wonder if that would kind of change how they then to occupy those spaces. But I really kind of interested, because licensing, people could be, one day they're working in Ruislip or in Useley or in West Drayton, and another time they could be working in Harrow because it's wherever the money takes them. But if we have no idea who's coming in and out as well, and how they are licensed, or whether they are legitimately licensed to be able to be delivery drivers in that sense, because anyone can do it right now.
You're correct, and that's kind of why we've worked sometimes with the police, and the police have done the vehicle, the licensing, the insurance checks to make sure that they are correctly legal people to be operating. As mentioned, we are looking at putting bays in, accommodating where we can, and we think that would probably help to control them. And it's finding appropriate locations, and which kind of don't cause too many concerns, because I'm sure we'll have people saying, I don't want them outside my house. So the virtual permit system coming in could be used to control motorbikes. We could put a motorcycle bay there and allow, say, a 15-20 minute window for them to park, and after that they have to pay. That would encourage them to have a turnover of spaces. But it's all in the... We're looking at all the options, and that is certainly one of them, that actually providing parking for them so we can try and manage where they are going.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Roy. I've got several questions, but I'll limit it. I've been out with officers. I've seen the job that they're doing. It's very difficult, and while it's a thankless task, they are doing their job. I do have concerns about the safety of officers on their own. I can understand where they're in certain areas where it's a residential street, they're checking the parking bays, that's fine. You've highlighted already about you can have people out on force, but my my memory goes back to my previous ward, where it's parents outside schools behaving in an atrocious way, and one of them did try to attack one of the enforcement officers. Fortunately, there was a bit of an issue with the camera because one of them failed. Fortunately, it was caught on the other one, and I had to call out the police because they didn't want that person getting away with what they were doing. So it is a bit of a concern, making sure that there is certain instances where at least 2 officers are going around. Because say on this occasion there was that potentially if that camera had failed on the officer, on the one that was being attacked. Another issue that's been raised and has come up a lot, speaking with residents over the past couple of years, I think there's an education issue with what enforcement officers can do. So on single yellow lines, they're usually time orientated. WLOs are not meant to be there, but there's a sort of a grace period of a sort for loading and whatnot. And then you've got the double yellows where you've got the hash things on the curbstones. I had a conversation really recently where residents just think, well, the officer comes along, you're parked, get a ticket on, and that's not how it works. I do feel that there's an education to residents that should know or should be educated on what the expectation is of officers when they go out to an area and what they can and can't do, because it's unfortunately coming up on a regular basis. You know, why it's sort of similar to what Councillor Small was saying, is that this sort of perceived chummy aspect to it, when actually that may not be the case. It's the fact that they are doing their job, but it's because regulation-wise, whatever, on that bit of part of the road, they're not allowed to do it until a certain point in time. And I do feel that there's anything that we could do to, I don't know, I'm not sure how you would do it necessarily, but I do feel that there's a gap there between what residents expect of an officer and what actually is the reality.
Before that's answered, could I just remind members that we still have another item on the agenda to go. Time is marching on. We've been discussing this for over half an hour now, so I think we'll give it another 5 minutes. Please keep your answers and questions brief. We still have Councillor Garden wishing to ask a question as well, so please bear that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. We do inform residents of where they can and can't enforce, and unfortunately it is a bit of a difficult legal situation for people to understand, and it doesn't always meet with what their perception should be. Certainly, I think we could improve the information online to try and explain bits and pieces there. But I think that is a longer term kind of education process, and using the website will probably help us on that. In respect to your first question about the health and safety of officers, if we have issues where we do think, I know the area you're talking about, I do recall that. We have issues where there are potential problems or known problems, we will try and put more than one person there. But we have over 100 schools in the borough, and we do try to get around all of them on a regular basis. So it's not always possible to put 2 people out at a location.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary? Okay, Councillor Gardner.
I didn't realise how enthralling parking was going to be. Right, thank you. Just to clarify, did you say effectively that CEOs are tagged, so basically you know where they are?
Their handheld computers have GPS tracking, so we could look and see where that handheld went to. If someone was to steal it, we could follow it. And but again, if they were attacked and left unconscious or something, and pressed the red, kind of red alert button, we would be able to find out where they was, or certainly where their handheld computer was, which hopefully would be near them.
That's actually something that you need to publicise as well, because I think people need to know that they can be that where you know exactly where the officers are. I
don't have a problem with that. It's something that we we don't hide it. When officers are involved in incidents, that they do normally highlight the fact that there's body-worn camera footage being captured as a way of trying to defuse situations. And that, the GPS tracking is just another element on that. But I don't have a problem with it being made public knowledge that we know where that system is. Most people will know that their mobile phone could be tracked in different locations. It's a similar piece of equipment.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Roy, for your presentation. You may leave if you wish to do so. And we'll go on to our next item, which is the post-review monitoring engagement with tenants and leaseholders. Thank you for your patience, Marion. Whenever you're ready, please give your presentation. We don't need to go by page. If you want to give a brief summary, we'll go straight to questions, okay?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, Councillors. Following the scoping report and my previous attendance here, the committee undertook a in-depth review of how we deliver, or customer engagement delivers, tenant and leaseholder engagement to residents in the borough. A number of recommendations were made, which included an action plan of delivery alongside a 3-year strategy, and to cover both resident engagement and high-rise and complex building engagement, which commonly we refer to as tower block engagement. And the tower block engagement strategy should be read in conjunction with the overarching engagement strategy. So this evening it's mainly just to secure endorsement of both strategies, and if you have any questions on what we have presented, I'm willing to take those questions.
Thank you very much. As the report indicates, the committee's recommended to note the report. Are there any questions following that, or are we happy to note? Councillor Sullivan, microphone please.
Thank you, Chair. Marion, you talk about support for residents, associations, attending meetings and support with funding. Can you let us know how often the community team attends residents' meetings, and explain what the funding for community activities are, please?
So thank you, Councillor Sullivan. For every residents' association in the borough that we are affiliated with, or they're affiliated with the council, for everyone that we fund, they sign up to a constitution, and within that constitution there are guidance, responsibilities, roles, as a structure for them to follow, which includes how funding is managed, what they can spend it on and what they can't spend it on, membership, a clear definition of the catchment area they cover, and we also publicize that information on readily available on the website. With regards to what the money is being spent on, the funding we give is mainly for the day-to-day running of the association. So it would be like where they need maybe they need a laptop or computer. It would be buying ink cartridges. It would be buying paper, doing printing, anything that would help their functionality. That's what the money would be used for. And there's clear definition within their constitution that there has to be an agreement for spend to be undertaken. And at the end of each year, prior to them reapplying for the funds, we expect them to do a financial audit, and that audit comes through to us, which we then put through to finance before we would issue another set of funding. So we do it yearly. The options are there, but it's up to them to apply.
Any follow-up? No. Any other people wishing to ask questions? No? Marion, thank you very much for your attendance this evening.
Thank you.
You may leave, not that there's much time left to do. Item 9 is the forward plan, Councillor Gardner. Thank you. Item 10, the work programme, pages 127 to 136. Liz, we had a couple of points on town centre regeneration HS2. Did you want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So, a couple of the items that are scheduled for the April meeting, the town centre regeneration post-pandemic item, and also the impact of HS2 on parking and traffic. So I've had questions from officers just in regard to that, basically asking if there's any further clarification that members can give us to what precisely they would like to be covered in those two items, if there is anything. If not, it will just be kind of a general overview.
I believe with HS2, Councillor Small, did you suggest that originally? Do you want to
two,
comment?
two things if I may, Chair. I'll make my point on HS2. I will write, if it's okay with you, to ward colleagues that are in Ickenham and South Harefield, South Ruislip, and my two fellow and Harefield village and that are affected most by HS2, to see if they've got any points. I know they don't sit on this committee, but ultimately they will, as diligent ward councillors, want to input. And then I'm really pleased to see the Battle at Britton Bunker on our visit list after that suggestion. I just wondered whether there was a possibility of Hayes Police Station and potentially going out on the beat. I'm not necessarily we're going to go around arresting people. But I just wondered whether there was something we could do with the police, not necessarily going catching criminals, but...
There is already something on the work programme for that, which is... Sorry, Liz.
Yes, so, yes, thank you for that. There is something on the work programme. I have been trying to follow that up with Jackie, but I will chase her up on that. And also on those two items, the HS2 and the town centre regeneration, because we have a very hefty agenda for April, we're probably going to move those two items back a month or two, just to even out the agenda, if that's okay with everybody here. Thank you.
Councillor Punjab?
Sorry, can I just ask, on the High Street regeneration, because it's something quite close to my heart, is this about a strategy for High Street regeneration? Is that what we're doing on that one? And because and what inputs are being made to kind of make it more for businesses? Is that what we're doing on that, or?
So I believe the suggestion came from the Labour side originally. So you can shape it to however you want. If you want the scoping around that particular issue, then you're more than welcome to have it on that. Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. It was also to do things like, because we had this item come up before the committee, I was just get a follow-up as to what officers and what the council was doing to support businesses. We always had these parklet things that have been put into certain areas. I know some of them have been removed, as to how successful they were. And things like that. So essentially it was to sort of follow up on what had come out of that and what progress had been made to support businesses and bring more footfall back to our high streets.
Yep.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Could I ask that we add to kind of how we creatively enable kind of empty shops to be used by the community as well? Because we have quite a lot going on in all sorts of high streets across our borough, and those shops kind of, they start becoming quite vacant for a very, very long time, and we have quite a lot of people in the community that could potentially benefit from using those spaces in a short-term pop-up. I think we did a recycling project in one of them a little while ago, and those kind of little community-based projects could actually benefit from a couple of months in spaces. Thank you.
Happy with that. Yep, hope that's enough for you to get on with, Liz.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Chairman.
I believe that's everything. Any feedback from our last site visit at all? We went to Breakspear. What's the next visit, Liz? Have we got anything penciled in?
We haven't actually got anything penciled in. I will get working on that.
We've got a long list to choose from, haven't we? So.
We have got a big list to choose from.
School trips,
Is it somebody who's...
So I believe the intention would be to go out with the contractor and just to see basically what happens on site. And I think the chairman was thinking we could maybe do that in springtime, because that would be potentially a busy time when all the weeds are growing back.
Councillor Gohill?
I just noticed that the leisure centres are on our list of places to visit. Could I make a request that we visit some of those soon?
Yeah.
If we're building the new Drayton Leisure Centre, I think we should be at the forefront of what needs improvements, and I think the site visit will help in that.
Maybe we could push for that one out of the list that we've got.
Is there one in particular?
Maybe do two visits. As you say, one on the current construction phase of the West Drayton one, but also one that's in place, such as Uxbridge. Yeah. Okay, I think that's everything then. So thank you very much for your attendance, everyone. Meeting declared closed. Have a good evening.